All right, welcome everybody to the second episode of the Decred Roundtable, a show where we have community members on to talk about everything Decred. We like to highlight things that are going on in the Decred community around the world, and we try and teach you a little bit about Decred every week, as well as some other cryptocurrencies. So on the show today, we have Trace, we have Solar,
Howdy.
we have Nick B,
Hey guys.
we have Crypto Casca, and then we have a special guest all the way from Brazil, Girino.
Hey.
All right, so why don't we get started? So this week in Decred, let's do some announcements first. So we've been having some issues with Slack, actually. So we've reached our maximum user limit. I don't know if anybody has noticed this week in the community, but if you've tried to join, you probably have been unable to. So Slack has been cracking down on some of these cryptocurrency open source projects, probably because we're not paying customers, and I think we cause them a lot of headaches. So we're currently in the process of migrating to Rocket.Chat. We know this is an issue, so if you're having trouble logging or becoming a user on Slack, we apologize. We're trying to get an alternative solution up and running. In the meantime, you are still able to join our IRC channel, and that connects you to the Slack general channel. So you'll still be able to communicate in Slack into the general channel in Slack if you use IRC. It's not the best solution, but it's a temporary solution until we get the actual real thing up. So bear with us, we're working on it. Next up in the announcements is, so last week I mentioned the Decredible Store. I just wanted to do a new announcement for it since I kind of messed it up last week. We have officially launched the Decredible Store. So you can go on there at decredible.com and get all of your Decred swag. If you have any questions, you can contact Slack user Hayon, that's spelled H-A-O-N. He runs the thing and he'll be able to hook you up. All right, and then one last announcement before moving on. So if you are part of the Decred community and you're launching some Decred related project or you're hosting some Decred event, you can reach out to me on Slack at LukeDP, and I'll either announce it on the show or we'll have you on the show to talk about it. We want to highlight all the awesome things the community is doing, so just reach out and we'll get that taken care of. But moving on to our first topic, our guest speaker on the show is all the way from Brazil, Girino. And Girino actually just spoke at a conference in Brazil called Bitconf today. He gave a talk on Decred, so we wanted to have him on the show, ask him how the talk went, how the Brazilian community received it, and yeah, welcome. So do you want to do you want to start off and give us a little bit of background on what the Bitconf is?
Okay, so Bitconf is a big user conference for Bitcoin in Brazil. It was started 5 years ago, and so it's now in its fifth edition. And it started like a small meeting, and today we had, it grew every year, and today it's the biggest conference in Brazil and one of the biggest ones in Latin America about Bitcoin. So we had 2 days of talks in every topic about cryptocurrencies. So, but there are people from the finance markets and people from tech industry. So everybody is a little bit represented there. And so Decred this year was one of the sponsors. So we also gave Emilio asked me to give a talk, and then I was there to talk about Decred.
Awesome. So you just gave this talk today. How did the Brazilian community receive it? Were they interested? Did they have a lot of questions? How'd it go?
Yeah, they had a lot of questions. So I give a presentation. I started with an abstract of what Jake gave at CoinDesk. So the beginning was like an introduction. Oh, what was said to CoinDesk, and then I started talking about the new things we had. So I talked about Atomic Swap, Lightning Network, and that's going out on the on Decred now, and people were like full of questions, especially app. That's something people are really interested in, especially the people from the IT community. Like the tech guys are always all want to know how they can implement this in their applications and things like this. So it was
Awesome. Yeah, that's really great to hear. So we actually have a very strong presence in Brazil, and that's one thing that I'm kind of curious about. How did that happen? How did Decred get so popular in Brazil? Do you know the origin story, the backstory behind how the community first started?
Emilio.
yes, that's Emilio's fault. I mean, Emilio is very well known in the cryptocurrency community in Brazil. He always chooses very well the currencies he invests. He usually talks to tech people to figure out which are the most solid and most technically advanced cryptocurrencies before he invests. So that's what happened. He came he came to me, he talked to me and asked me everything I knew about Decred, and I was like studying about it. And he went, okay, I think it's very solid. The tech is very solid. So I'm going to invest in these guys. And he also, I think he also talked a lot with Jake and everyone in the everyone that was involved in the launching of Decred, he formed a very solid opinion that Decred was the future.
Okay, great.
After he did this, he doesn't. After Emilio makes his mind, it doesn't need anything more. We just hear what Emilio has to say and say, okay, this is a very solid currency.
That's great to hear.
We know that he always he's always very careful before investing. So people did invest in the beginning of Decred because people trust him.
Absolutely. And how did you first come to find out about Decred and get involved in the community?
Yeah, that's exactly that was it. Emilio came to me because he wanted to ask some technical questions. So I am a tech guy, so he asked, oh, what do you think? The language they're using and things like this. And I was, okay, Golang is a very good language for developing cryptocurrencies. And I read a little bit about what was available about Decred, and I said, okay, I think it's very solid. The tech is very solid. So that's how I came to know about Decred. And then he told me, okay, do you remember Decred, the currency I told you about? They have in the airdrop. Why don't you participate in the airdrop? I was like, okay, that's cool. And then I got rich. A lot of money from the
airdrop participants back in February 2016. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Very cool. So does the Brazilian community, do you guys keep in touch with one another? Do you guys host events? How do you guys, collaborate?
Okay, most of the collaboration is on Facebook, where the Brazilian community is very active. I think, but not all the community is there. Only the small one, the small investors. The whales, they're somewhere else. I don't know where they are. I know they exist because they invest in the pool, the Brazilian stake pool. So I know there are a lot of people from Brazil that are investing there, but they're not they're not present in the communities.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know where they come from.
Do you have a lot of miners in Brazil?
Like stake miners?
Like
or
POW.
Proof of work.
Okay, proof of work. We do have a lot of people that ask me questions after the talk at the conference. They are proof of work miners. They want to mine Decred, but they're having trouble one way or another. So there is a big proof of work mining community, but they're not mining Decred directly. They're all in dual mining modes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But there is a lot of people mining Decred in Brazil in dual mining.
Cool. And for those who don't know, do you want to kind of explain what dual mining is?
Yeah, of course. Dual mining is like Ethereum, when you're mining Ethereum, you're not using every resource in the GPUs on your video board. So you can use the free resources to mine another coin that doesn't use the same resources. So you can mine at the same time Ethereum and Decred. And that's what dual mining is. You use the main resources to mine one coin, and the rest of the resources that are not used, you use to mine another coin.
Okay. Do you participate in any proof of work mining yourself?
Sorry, didn't get you.
Oh, do you participate in any proof of work mining yourself?
Yes. My machine is currently turned off because, I don't know, it's 37 Celsius. I don't know how much it is in Fahrenheit, but it's very hot. Like something
Okay.
about 100, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I turned it off because it was generating
Almost 100 degrees.
even more heat here in my home. So yeah,
Yeah,
but until like 5 days ago, I was mining Decred.
Awesome. And one last question. So we have all these communities around the world that are starting to pop up. You guys in the Brazilian community have a very strong community. How do you spread the word about Decred? Is it mostly just word of mouth? Do you guys do any other type of outreach events or kind of like educational events?
No, it's basically word of mouth, but we've also tried to talk always to the main people in the communities, like some lead role in the communities, talk to business that are related to Bitcoin or blockchain in some way or another. So today was the first event that we really participate. So it was the first time we really talked to a big public, but usually it's one-to-one. We try to find some people that have some business running with cryptocurrency and propose to them, hey, how about you use Decred instead of the currencies you're currently using? For example, we have one company in Brazil called Original My that they do timestamping of physical documents on the blockchain. And when DCR time was launched, we asked them, why don't you use Decred to do this timestamping? And he was like, okay, I'm gonna try. And now he uses mainly Decred because it's way cheaper than using Ethereum or Bitcoin.
I believe
So
that's the first, commercial use of DCR time is by Original My.
Probably we like the when you announced the DCR time, I contacted Osorio, which is the owner of Original Mine, and told him, why don't you use the DCR time? It looks like the things you do. And it was, okay, I'm going to try. And it was successful.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for your time. Girino, it was awesome getting an update about the Brazilian community and the talk that you just gave at the Bitconf conference. From what you said, it was really well received, and people are starting to hear more about Decred, which is always a nice thing. So let's kind of move on to the next topic. What we have on the agenda next is, I'm sure you guys saw this. This was all over Twitter throughout the week, but there's kind of like this feud between Vays and the Decred community. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
Oh, of course.
Okay. Well, we don't want to get like too much into the specifics. There's a lot of he said, she said type thing, but it did bring up a couple interesting topics that I wanted to talk about. And the first one is kind of this general trend in the cryptocurrency ecosystem of throwing out the word scam and like calling projects scams, not necessarily knowing whether or not the background of the project or doing the in-depth research, but just because you don't necessarily like a project or it competes with the project that you're a part of. So I wanted to get y'all's thoughts on this general topic. Trace, do you want to kick off the discussion?
Yeah, definitely. And first and foremost, I just want to say, I definitely respect Tone in some of his technical analyses that he's done, and he's really sharp with that. But I think we just kind of have to look at and see and remember that all these projects are experiments when it comes down to it. they haven't been around for very long. We're still experimenting with, different implementations and just scaling and just all these different aspects of all these projects. So, for people to come out and outright say these things are scams without really looking into them, that's a little rough. But I think in order for, and we talked about this a little bit in our last show, in order for a lot of these things to succeed, there needs to be some competition in the market, and especially too, when we're using almost a Bitcoin clone, we're almost contributing on this open source thing together. And it's just like, if there's an implementation, even though it's in Go language, as far as, some of the different aspects of the privacy and the governance, like Bitcoin can take that and use it. And it's like, it's there to share, just like our atomic swaps. Like people have been claiming it and using it without giving Decred credit. Vertcoin's a great example. Just these kind of things. It's just like, it's all for the community. It's not something we're just keeping, tight to the chest. And so, for people to just outright say, these other projects that aren't Bitcoin are scams, I think that's a little ignorant.
Right. I think it also, it detracts, like, it's kind of like a boy cried wolf type scenario where, there actually are a lot of scams in this space. And so calling like legitimate projects, or even if like you don't think that project will ultimately be successful, calling it a scam is kind of disingenuous and kind of hurts the ecosystem, right? Because if you look at the tech industry and tech company and tech investments, they typically follow a power law distribution. And so what I mean by that is that a small number of startups or tech companies will make up the vast majority of the value in the ecosystem. So there's a VC named Fred Wilson of Union Square Ventures that is, very prominent VC. He invests in the Bitcoin space as well, was one of the first investors in Blockstack. But the way that he looks at his portfolio is that he breaks it down into what he says, 33%, 33%, and 33%. So 33% will totally lose the entire investment. 33% will break even, and then the gains for the portfolio will be made from the last 33%, right? And even in that last 33%, you'll still have one company that makes up the vast majority of the gains. The way Peter Thiel describes it is that the best company in the portfolio will be worth more than all the other investments combined. And the second best company will be worth more than the third down on all of those investments. And so you get this power law distribution where the vast majority of gains are from a few select companies, but that doesn't mean that like the rest of the companies are, necessarily bad investments, right? Startups are risky, cryptocurrency projects are risky, but they're all experiments, right? And experiments is what drives innovation. Do you guys agree with that sentiment? Do you disagree?
No, I definitely do. And one thing I would just say too is, cryptocurrencies in and of themselves are basically an empty asset class. And so it's like the 33, 33, 33, I think is very relevant, to a space that has a lot of companies, a lot of new things popping up. But I think now so more than ever, if you're able to identify a good development team with a solid product that's not too specific in a niche, I think there's a lot of potential to have, even a bigger slot of growth and success, because right now we're in a $170 billion, market space where, in 2-3 years, we're going to be in multi-trillion market space. I mean, that's insane growth for a lot of these smaller projects and these bigger projects like Bitcoin, Decred, Ethereum, all along those ways. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of potential for growth, but because of that, there's a lot of ICO scams.
There are. So how do you identify the scams without inhibiting innovation? I think that's like the tough question, right?
You let the market do its thing.
Due diligence.
Right? Free market.
Do they have a working product?
Financial Darwinism.
You go on their website and see if they have the dancing geometric figures in the background, and then you really get a yellow flag and see if it's a scam.
Yeah, the particle effects.
Yeah, exactly. If you see the particle effects, it's like, that's a yellow flag.
One thing about ICOs is because I have a bit of a background in a tech startup and raising funds from VCs, and just to give an example, like our company was able to grow to like 72 people over 3 years on a handful of $1 million raise. And so, when I see ICOs that raise tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, I think to myself, like why? Like, why do they need so much? Especially if they're just starting the project, they're just starting development. I don't think they really need that kind of funds. I think they can get by with just $1 million at most to start. And so I always question that, like why they're, you know, and I get it that people are jumping in and there's no cap and it's just what they get. But I feel like there should be maybe some self-governance in terms of how much you're willing to accept, you know. And what do you guys think? Something like that.
I can definitely see that. I also, like, if you look at the ICO market, like those big raises, they're not necessarily happening anymore. Like the market has almost kind of corrected itself to some extent from a couple months ago, and the mania that we were seeing. Like you're not seeing the huge 4, 5, 6x gains on ICOs. And so, you know, I think what Crypto Kafka said, you know, let the market decide, is very relevant, because yes, we had this period of very, very frothy, like crazy gains, but I think it's in the trend of correcting itself right now. And a lot of people are going to feel pain, but, you know, ultimately you let the market decide. Like that's the beauty of cryptocurrency projects, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to go back to Tone Vays, but I mean, you know, him kind of being the bulldog and the bad guy, you know, it's kind of a good thing in some sense, because I think it does instill some caution in what people are looking at, and just to be more on the cautious side as they're evaluating different projects. Because I mean, prime example, you know, you have all this new money flowing in from, you know, these college, even high school age kids, and it's just like they don't know what they're doing. They all of a sudden everyone's a day trader, and you know, it's like that can pop really quick.
Yeah, caution with everything but Bitcoin is Tone Vays' concept, which isn't healthy.
The maximalism.
Right, that maximalism isn't healthy. I think people need to be looking at other projects that aren't Bitcoin solely, that have the chance of standing the test of time, if you will. And obviously, we all believe Decred is definitely one of them.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, while we were talking about Tone, you know, I did want to. Well, like you said, we're all long-term Decred holders, right? We're not Decred shills. You know, I've done my research, but if there's something that I missed, you know, I want to know about it. I want to talk about it. I want to discuss it. Like asking the hard questions of these cryptocurrencies is how we improve and how we move forward as an ecosystem and continue to innovate. So, you know, I just wanted to take this opportunity to extend a formal invite to Tone. You know,
Yes.
Yeah, extend a formal invite to, if he wants to learn more about, you know, Decred, we can get him on the Decred Assembly YouTube show, set him up with the leaders of the project, and he can ask them directly, you know, the hard questions. Or if it's easier for him, we can set something up where we send somebody from Decred to his show. You know, like I said, if Tone is interested in learning more about Decred, we want to help facilitate that in any way we can. And we're all about like open, honest, informed discussions and asking the hard questions.
Yep.
Do you all agree?
Ignorance doesn't fly.
I hope he accepts.
Yeah. Well, I don't necessarily think he will. He like had a video saying he was like done with the whole feud, but you know, I think it's just it's a good topic to bring up, because asking the hard questions is an important, you know, aspect of, you know, anytime you're evaluating a cryptocurrency project.
Yeah, it's like we got to be honest with ourselves. If we get on our high horse and say that we know everything about something, it's like that breeds ignorance and it breeds stagnation.
Yeah. And I did want to actually bring up one specific tweet of his. So he tweeted out, and this was a pretty, it got a lot of attention. Vitalik, you know, the founder of Ethereum, actually commented on it as well, just saying he didn't agree with the logic. But the tweet that Tone sent out was, "I have zero respect for devs who choose not to help Bitcoin, but instead decide to print their own money competing with Bitcoin." What was y'all's initial reactions to this tweet?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
People should be able to do what they want with their lives, and the fact that someone wants to go ahead and start a new project because they just don't think it's possible under the Bitcoin protocol, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, those are the projects I love, right? With Decred. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a superior product. There are lots of people who love Bitcoin and Decred at the same time, but ultimately, you should let people do what they want to do, and at the end of the day, that's good for both the economy and the environment. So it's a very silly argument.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment as well. I think it's, you could argue that like that type of mentality is actually even like an anti-innovation mentality, right? Which is not what we want to encapsulate in the cryptocurrency ecosystem. You know, I think it brings up this topic of voice versus exit. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with this subject at all, but there's a really great talk by Balaji Srinivasan, the CEO of 21, which is a company in the Bitcoin space doing all kinds of cool stuff. But I'll link to it in the show notes. But basically, you know, this concept of voice first exit is that anytime there's an organization, right, you have two options. If you want to implement change, you can either use your voice and try and change it internally, or you can exit the organization, either starting your own or join a competitor and change it that way. And, you know, this organizations, they can be countries, they can be companies, they can be open source projects, right? And so, you know, Silicon Valley itself and the tech industry really has been shaped by this concept of exit, right? This dates back to Fairchild Semiconductor with the Traders 8. And so basically, like, the ability to leave an open source project or leave a company and start your own thing is where the innovation happens, right? Like, if there's a quote back in 1998 where Bill Gates, when it was asked, you know, what competitors do you fear the most? And he didn't say Oracle or Netscape or Apple. He said, I fear someone in a garage who's devising something completely new. You know, and what we later come to find out is that person was, or people were, Larry Page and Sergey Brin working on Google. But if they had actually tried to, you know, join Microsoft, which had 26,000 employees at the time, and launch some, you know, initiatives for a Project X, a moonshot factory, right, to work on autonomous cars and things like that, you know, they probably wouldn't have made much traction. So they had to exercise their right to exit. And that's where innovation comes from. That's what the whole concept of startups is derived from. So I think that the whole mentality expressed in that tweet is just very anti-innovation, very anti-free market. And that's
who said it? Was it Buterin who said, well, like, he should have just decided to help out the US dollar and join the Fed and just see if he can fix that system? I mean, it's the same logic. It's ridiculous. He thought a way to trump the system and say, no, I'm going to do this thing over here. It's going to turn out better. At least for the time being. And yeah, so it's silly logic. I'm not sure if it was him that said it, but I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, before moving on, did anybody else want to kind of jump in, share some thoughts on any of the topics or anything related?
Yeah, I think Bitcoin maximalism is based in fear, which is sort of understandable, because say you're heavily invested in Bitcoin and you think, you know, we all believe cryptocurrency is the future, but, you know, look where Yahoo or AOL is right now. So there's a very, you know, real fear that Bitcoin could be largely replaced. So I'm terrified of that even, and I mostly in Decred.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, the evolution of the voice versus exit is going to come when we do have a platform where you're able to have a consensus system that, you know, the majority are actually going to be able to move things in accordance to how they want to see, you know, a different platform progress. And so it'll be very interesting to just kind of see how that concept evolves as we see a DAO and those sort of things develop, because I think that is going to change the environment. Right.
Well, it's also the fact that these cryptocurrency projects are open source is this whole new kind of aspect of this voice first exit, right? Before, you could exit a company, but you couldn't take the whole code base with you. And now the fact that you can, you know, you could argue that that's a great thing, you know, being able to try to, like I said, experiment, to fork a code base, to try out all these different subsets of an idea in a very, you know, short time frame, that is a good thing. And so we want to encourage exit and really decrease the barriers to exit. But there is one exception to this, and I think this is very prominent in the Bitcoin community, is like, okay, if you're working for Google and you want to start a startup, right, you're welcome to do that, but you can't call it Google 2X, right? You can't call it, like, you can't take the Google name. And so I think one of the big issues with this whole concept of voice versus exit that we're trying to work through right now in the cryptocurrency ecosystem is trying to basically steal the brand from the cryptocurrency that you're forking off from. And you know, maybe we'll have to implement some type of mechanisms to prevent this in the future, but I think that is, you know, pretty an issue, and it's not a good thing. It's pretty dangerous.
Mm-hmm. I think you hit the nail on the head talking about how open source makes this game so very different than startups, you know. Like, say, for example, you have a genius dev who creates a new way to do atomic swaps, but it's open source, so someone else can just copy paste and say, hey, look what I did. I did an atomic swap too. So how do you, you know, have these, I don't know, so I guess it's an unresolved question. What will happen if, you know, you have a really good chain, say with great devs coming out with new things, and then you have this other chain with, you know, say they have really great marketing and they just copy paste the stuff from the other chain and, you know, market it to more people. So is that sustainable? You know, what will be the end result of that? It's an open question.
I think we can look at the internet.
Sorry, go ahead, Trace.
No, I was just gonna say, I think like we can look at the internet and just see, you know, when the internet had first started, there was so much attack and so much, you know, people wanting to kind of duplicate what they were doing, you know, but as the internet has matured, it's become harder and harder to disrupt. You know, Andreas says in his article, you know, about Bitcoin anti-fragility, you know, as things are exposed to more and more attacks and it continues to remain, it gets harder and harder to overcome it if it resists the attacks and just gets stronger through the exposure of them. And so it'll be interesting to kind of see what Bitcoin is doing through these next two forks, the Bitcoin Gold and the 2x fork. So I think it, you know, if it does make it through, I think it will, you know, almost promote still the brand of Bitcoin. But, you know, what the distribution of these, you know, free coins going forward is going to look like, and as people just, you know, can randomly fork it like the Bitcoin Gold one, you know, I don't know what that'll do to Bitcoin in the future.
So
yeah, I agree.
So one last thing on the Tone Vays thing, I think it's important that when someone is calling something a scam or just willing to throw it right into the garbage, that they take the time to research the coin. It's pretty apparent to me that Tone hasn't truly researched Decred. So yeah, I mean, we extended the invitation out to him, both at the Roundtable and to Assembly, and I hope he takes it on. But I mean, speaking to him, I guess directly, now look into Decred. It's a very unique system. It's not like any other coin out there. We're building something that's I think gonna change crypto, not necessarily now, but it's gonna happen in the future. So take the time, look into it. It's not just your average coin or your average kind of Bitcoin protocol copy paste, if you will.
Yeah, it actually has a very unique use case and very unique implementation, right? That's not very popular out there. So I totally agree with that sentiment. Hopping back to something you said, Trace, I thought the building up resiliency as time goes on, as more attacks happen, I thought that was really interesting, and it kind of relates to this concept of, you can almost think of these blockchains or these cryptocurrency projects as metaphorically similar to organisms, right? Organisms evolve over time by you having some DNA and then having offspring with random mutations in that DNA. And as a result, you try a bunch of different subtypes of that organism, right? And then natural selection will go and kill off the weak, the strong will survive, and they'll continue to get stronger and evolve with the ecosystem and become more resilient, right? And so the really powerful thing about these cryptocurrency projects is that we figured out a way to financially incentivize the development of open source technologies, right? So now they evolve like in a very similar way to organisms, where you can fork them analogous to a mutation in the DNA. And then as a result, you can try all of these different subtypes of a general idea quite quickly, and you can let the market decide. You can let the market kill off the weak ones, or let the strong ones continue on and just continue to go stronger over time. So I thought that the building up resiliency and just this whole relating or kind of mimicking evolution is a great way to really speed up progress and innovation. Have y'all ever heard that argument before?
I've not, but I agree with that perspective. I think it makes a lot of sense, actually. I actually agree with like all the guys' sentiments about the whole situation. It makes a lot of sense. And I do hope Tony takes up the time to come talk to us directly about the project. I do think like maybe because he was at that BlockCon event and apparently it was jam-packed with ICOs, maybe he just had his fill of all these projects he doesn't understand yet and just kind of like, you know, reacted.
Yeah, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Like he looked extremely tired, you know. And no, it's true. Like we don't necessarily attack him. We want to invite him in and like let him know that we're open to like asking the hard questions and talking, having informed debates and discussions.
Yeah,
So,
I did want to just quickly touch up on something that Solar said about, you know, with these projects being open source and someone could just literally take the code and copy it and then run with it and then maybe take credit for it, for example. And, you know, and kind of raising the question like, well, how does that situation get handled? I don't know what the answer is, but at least I do know for something that maybe that we as a community can do is to continue to do stuff like this, posting announcements, engaging the community, and really embrace all of the technical advances that have been made, so that people do know about it. Like I feel like maybe there's just a lack of exposure to all like the great stuff that the Decred project has done. So it's up to us to make sure that we can continue to communicate outwardly and get more people like informed and involved.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about this, honestly. I think that Decred has kind of solved the puzzle, if you will, with regard to governance, at least for now. And I think as the governance, the DAO starts fleshing itself out, we get proposal system, decentralized funds, etc. I don't think there's going to be much of a need to push this to happen. I think it'll be very organic. I think it'll be very natural. I think it's going to be very interesting. I'm not sure where the project will morph to. Maybe it's in a direction I'm not 100% into. But the fact that this project will be self-sustainable, very organically, dynamically grown, I'm not worried. I'm worried about projects where it's all based off the donations or it's one person doing it or whatever. And there's some great projects out there that are like that. I like. But there's something to be said about something that's just a machine and it just kind of operates within itself. And that's how I see Decred.
Yeah, we're at the ground level here, and time's going to tell. Time's going to be the one thing as this community and as just the technology continues to mature. Things need to get less technical. They need to get more user friendly, because that's going to be the biggest hurdle that this entire space is to overcome in order for this to actually get used. It's like on an enterprise level, on a peer-to-peer level, and that's going to be, I think, whoever can start to do that first, whoever can allow people to participate in an easy, fun way first, is going to start to be the one who takes a spot in the top 10.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be a grand experiment, which I'm excited to see how it plays out. So moving on to the last segment of the show. So this is where we try and teach the community about some aspect of Decred. And today we're going to talk about the Decred origin story. So this whole story, you can find it on the Decred blog, which is theDecredDigest.com. The blog post is titled Decred, Where Did It All Begin? And we'll link to it in the show notes. So, the blog post has all of the original, or the links to the original Bitcoin talk post, so you can go and really dive in and see the true origins of the project. But we'll go ahead and start this story off. It begins with a company called Conformal Systems. So Conformal Systems was founded by Jake Yokompaya in 2010 and was an open source software engineering firm that focused on a range of privacy and security oriented solutions. So there are a couple projects that they built out. One was called Cypherite. It was a zero knowledge cloud storage solution. Another was called Coinvoice. It was a Bitcoin payment processor. But what they're really known for is in early 2013, Jake had a less than pleasant interaction with the core developers regarding porting the Bitcoin daemon over to OpenBSD. And so he decided that, a really interesting project and something that could benefit the ecosystem would be another implementation of Bitcoin. And so when I say another implementation, I want to distinguish between something like an altcoin, like Bitcoin Cash, and what this actually is just Bitcoin written in a different programming language. So the original Bitcoin implementation was written in C++. This one that Conformal Systems built out was written in Golang. And so it was called BTCD, which eventually turned into BTC Suite. And it's an alternative full node implementation that is very popular in the ecosystem today. Projects like Lightning Network are built on top of it, OpenBazaar, Ethereum, Factom, BitGo, they all use it in some form or fashion. So it's used throughout the industry. And one other thing I want to point out is, while we tell this story, you'll hear us refer to Company Zero. So Conformal Systems becomes Company Zero, but for all practical purposes, you can just think of them as the same thing. So Nick, do you want to kick us off with the introduction of the user taco time?
Yeah, so I was doing some reading and searching around and stuff, and found out that the roots of Decred project run pretty deep in the cryptocurrency space, and can really be traced back to around like April 2013, where there was a thread posted on Bitcoin Talk titled "Want to make an altcoin that actually changes something." And in there, well, this thread was basically kind of like a call for people who were interested in much needed improvements to Bitcoin. So in there, among all the replies, Taco Time responded saying something like that he had been thinking about something for a while, and he was working on publishing a technical paper. About 4 days later, he posted a new thread entitled it "Memcoin to a cryptocurrency based on proof of work, proof of stake system." And you can actually read the technical paper on the DecredDigest story. But essentially what it is MC2 is like it extended and combined the principles of both Litecoin and Peercoin. So as the conversation kept growing on the thread there, Taco Time began to coordinate the project, looking for funding, and searching for a lead developer. And eventually he linked up with Inksock, who's actually still working on the Decred project today with all of us. And they worked together to kind of experiment on this MC2 concept. So as 2014 now came around, Inksock continued to organize the MC2 project. And he eventually met and approached Jake, who was the CEO of Company Zero. And Taco Time, Inksock, and Jake shared a lot of their philosophies around collaborative governance and the need for alternative systems. Not at the expense of Bitcoin, but more of like an extension of its technology.
Yeah, so this was all around the end of 2013, early 2014. So just to give you a little bit of a background of what Company Zero was thinking at the time is they had actually been thinking about starting an altcoin, right, even before Inksock approached them. And so when Inksock did approach Jake, he liked the idea. He researched some other proposals out there. You had MC2, you had Peercoin, which is what MC2 was based on, and then you also had proof of activity. So the proof of activity had been proposed at the time, but the actual white paper that most people are familiar with hadn't actually come out yet. That comes out a little bit later. And that's the one that Charlie Lee, the founder of Litecoin, is one of the authors on. But Jake ultimately decides to go with the MC2 derived coin. And you have Taco Time, who had been working on this MC2 proof of concept, and he had actually been building it on top of BTCD, the Golang Bitcoin implementation. So right around that time, he hands the working concept off to Company Zero, and he continues to provide code audits and feedback, but he then shifts his development focus over to launching Monero, and Company Zero continues to develop Decred.
Yeah. Actually, there's a couple of things I wanted to bring up as well. Like throughout as the project progressed throughout like 2014, 2015, there's some important motivations that were kind of like behind the whole project. So while contributing to Bitcoin development, there appeared to be like persistent problems, namely project governance, funding development, and an imbalance of power between developers, users, and miners. It's fairly well known that within the Bitcoin community, there had been some like long-running clashes of views. And like, for example, one of them was and still is like the increase of the maximum block size, whether to do that or not. So over time, these clashes of views kept getting worse, and even continuing on till this day, which you were kind of seeing the results of with these hard forks. So that was one of the issues, along with clashing views. Funding was another big issue. Funding full-time developers, can be pretty expensive. And with open source projects, the funding typically comes from donations, and typically donations are very limited. So as the project grew, it appears, and it, the project grows and it needs more developers to work on it full time. The funding wasn't met, so outside funding started to kind of seep in. And so I think around that time, entities like Blockstream and MIT Media Lab came into the picture. Now that's great for supporting the developers so that they can continue working on like important technology full time and be supported. But it also raises potentially conflicts of interest and brings into question maybe the extent of influence that the outside entities have over the project. So it's something to consider with like the governance issues. And another issue with in terms of like the imbalance of power was at least back then there was like sometimes miners can have unchecked influence on the blockchain. So for example, they can conduct things like denial of service by mining empty blocks or censoring transactions by explicitly not including them in blocks or hindering new consensus rules and stuff like that. So solving all of these challenges was kind of like the motivations behind the development of the Decred project. And so I think, we're still continuing to work on that like to this day, but getting back into like the origin of the project from 2013, 2014, all the way up to 2015, in December 2015, that's when the project was officially announced. And in February, I believe, of 2016, the mainnet finally launched, bringing us to where we are today.
Yeah, so awesome. Thanks for that story, Nick. So that takes us up from the very first when Decred was very first thought of all the way to the launch. So next week we're going to be going into the actual launch of the blockchain, the airdrop, the pre-mine. We're going to be comparing it to the launches of other blockchains. How does a pre-mine differ from an ICO? All that type of good stuff. So hopefully next week we'll have all kinds of interesting conversations. So that's our show for this week. Thank you guys for joining us. If you guys want to come, and if you're new to the community, come and join us on Facebook at Decred Project, on Twitter at Decred Project, or on Reddit at rdecred. Ask questions, get involved, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, look at the links below, guys. Huge, great resources.
All right. See you next week.